I recently filmed a video where I ranked every single classic novel that I've ever read. So over 80 books were included in that video. And I really enjoyed going down memory lane and thinking about all the wonderful novels that I've read before. And it gave me an idea to make a video and recommend some of those classics to people who maybe are new to reading classics. Not all of them have to be 800 pages beasts that take months to get through. Some of them are actually short, fast-paced, and actually enjoyable to read. If you've always wanted to get into classics but didn't know where to start, this is the video for you. I'm going to be recommending to you 8 classics that I think are the perfect starting point for you. I feel like in the recent years, there's this kind of return to reading and return to enjoying classics. And I think in large part that is probably due to BookTube and Book Talk. And I think that's so amazing. I'm so happy to see that more people are enjoying reading and they're taking reading as a leisurely activity that they could do. But I've also noticed that a lot of people are really intimidated by picking up classics. Oftentimes, I think people assume you have to have some sort of literary knowledge in order to get to enjoy classics and understand them. Well, that's certainly the case for certain classics. There are also so many of them that is just not the case for. In fact, by starting reading these what I would call simpler, easygoing classics, you will start to gain those extra literary references that you need to get tackling on those bigger, more challenging classics. Okay, so let's talk about how I determined what is a good classic for a beginner. I went with 3 main criteria that to me make sense. The first one is length. When people are intimidated by reading classics or books in general, oftentimes I hear that the main reason is the length of the book. I personally don't think that length equals difficulty, so not because a book is 800 pages that is going to be a difficult book to read, but it does make it a book that takes longer to get through. And so maybe for a beginner who isn't used to reading classics, having to get through a book that takes maybe months to read is not the most accessible or enjoyable thing to do. So for this reason, I kind of went for classics that are a little bit shorter. I did not put any restrictions on the number of pages of the classics that are on this list, but I just didn't go for those huge 600, 800, 1,000 page classics like Anna Karenina or The Count of Monte Cristo that take forever to get through. The second criteria is writing. Most classics are typically older works, and the language can sometimes be a little bit challenging to get through just because it's a bit removed from the way that we speak nowadays. Reading something that makes you think about what every word or what every sentence is trying to convey, like in terms of meaning, can be a little bit off-putting and a bit annoying, especially if you're at the beginning of your journey. And so what I try to do is to select classics that, in my opinion, have pretty accessible language and language that is generally just easy to understand. The third criteria is the fact that I actually enjoyed reading these books. All of the books on this list were 4 to 5 stars for me. They were absolute bangers. I loved them all. I really enjoyed my time reading them. There are certainly classics that I can think about that would be both accessible in terms of the length and in terms of the writing, but in my opinion, they were just boring books. They were books that I didn't enjoy. And so I wanted to recommend books that are actually enjoyable and will make you want to go back and pick up that book to finish it. Of course, just because I liked something doesn't mean that automatically everybody will like it, but I think it would just be a little bit disingenuous for me to recommend books that I personally thought they were boring. All right, let's get into the books. Most of the books here are from the English canon, but I do have 2 works on this list that are from authors that have written in other languages, like the original work is written in another language and translated into English. I'll tell you about those when we get to them. So let's get into the first one. The first book that I have to recommend is Fyodor Dostoyevsky's White Nights. So this is a Russian classic about a man who is very gloomy, very sad, very lonely. And it's set in St. Petersburg, where this man is going on one of his regular night walks. On one of these walks, he meets a young woman and he starts to talk to her, he starts to get to know her, and the two form what is a seemingly deep connection from the perspective of the man. They share their dreams, they share their disappointments, they share their opinions of the world over the course of a couple of nights. Although this book is super short, it's actually classified as a novella. You can definitely taste Dostoyevsky's emotional depth in this book. It's incredibly poetic, very, very melancholic. When I think about summertime sadness, this is the book that comes up to my mind. I think this makes the perfect entry into Russian literature. It's literally so short, you could finish it in one go. It's very accessible language, and it's just a story that keeps you wanting to read more to see what happens at the end. The plot is extremely straightforward. It's basically just the plot about the connection between these two people. And while some people might say, there's not much of a plot because there's no high stakes, there's nothing really going on here, it's really just these people meeting and forming a connection, I still think it's worth the read, and I still think it's an enjoyable read because you just kind of want to keep turning the page to see what happens at the end. What I like about this is also the fact that although the story and the plot is super simple, it's a story that is lyrical, and you get so much joy out of reading beautiful passages from Dostoyevsky. I kind of want to read you one just to get you a taste of it. But here it is. I can't help coming here tomorrow. I'm a dreamer. I have so little life that I regard such moments as this one now to be so rare that I can't help repeating these moments in my dreams. And this is when he was talking to the girl after he had just met her, where for one of the first time in his life, he feels alive. He feels like this is a moment that he will constantly be living in the future, because it's one of the happiest moments of his life where he has made a connection with someone. The next book that I have to recommend is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This was actually my first Hemingway, and I think it was the perfect introduction to his writing. So this novel follows a young American journalist named Jake and his group of friends who are basically just traveling from Paris, going to Spain, and what they want to do specifically in Spain is they want to go over to see the bullfights that are very famous in that region. You essentially just witness them going to parties, going to cafes, smoking, dancing, having fun, and essentially at the core of the story is a romantic relationship between Jake and one of the very charismatic women named Lady Brett. This is another one of those books where nothing much happens, but the writing is super, super charismatic and enchanting, and you just want to keep reading to see what happens in their little friend group. I think Hemingway in general is great for beginners just because his writing is super direct, no flowery sentences, nothing too complicated to read. And in fact, he's known for something that is called the iceberg writing theory, where his sentences are super short and seemingly simple, but they suggest deeper emotions and deeper themes that have to be revealed by the readers themselves. I really love this type of writing because it's not a writing that is super complex to get through, where you start to have a headache after 5 minutes because you're just trying to understand what the author is saying, but rather is the complete opposite of that. It's a writing that is simple to get through. You get what they're saying, but after you have read the whole thing or sections of it, you just kind of have to sit with yourself and ask yourself, what is the author trying to convey that is kind of sitting between the lines, that is a little bit more than just the simple writing. And I think that's perfect for a beginner, because at the end of the day, classics have something to say about the world that is a bit more than just a fun story. It's a commentary on the world, a commentary on history, a commentary on the human connections. Having someone like Hemingway who makes the writing accessible, I think it's the perfect opportunity for a reader to start thinking about those things within a book. In an essence, this book is really capturing the disillusionment of the lost generation, which is the generation of people who started coming of age after World War I, and they were trying to kind of reinvent themselves, and understand the world after the war. And you definitely feel this energy and this vibe in this melancholical book. I really, really loved it. The next book that we have is an Austen book, and that is my favorite Austen book, Northanger Abbey. In this book, we follow Catherine, who is a very sweet and imaginative girl. We follow her visiting Bath, and we also follow her staying at the mysterious Northanger Abbey. This book is essentially a little bit of a satire on the Gothic genre, so if you're into Gothic or a little bit more spooky stuff, this is the book that you want to pick up from this list. Catherine in this book kind of lets her imagination about what she's reading in Gothic books run amok, and her judgments gets quite cloudy in some instances, and it just makes for cringy misunderstandings that are really funny to witness. What I like about this book is that it's really different from the other one of Austen's novels. I find that most of her novels are very, very similar in themes, very similar in writing, in style, but what I like about this one, it's a little bit more playful than the other ones. It adds the Gothic elements, and if you're into that, I think this will be really, really a delight for you to read. This book doesn't really require, in my opinion, a lot of historical knowledge to understand it, or even literary knowledge, because even though the satire about the Gothic genre is definitely in here, I think it's quite blatant and direct and also very playful. So I don't think it's something that requires a lot of kind of thinking or knowledge about this genre for you to be able to get at it. I think there's also a bit less of an emphasis in this book about social rules and economical standards, which is really the main key themes that you can find in her other novels like Pride and Prejudice. And this is more about personal growth of our heroine. And that's why I really love it. It's a really witty and charming little book, and it's honestly the perfect pick for autumn. Okay, let's get into the next one, which is James Baldwin, Giovanni's Room. This book. This is the intimate and heartbreaking love story between David, who is an American living in Paris, and Giovanni, who is an Italian man also living in Paris as a bartender. This book essentially grapples with their coming to terms with their sexuality, with their relationship with one another. The themes obviously explored here are the themes of love, shame, identity. This is set in the 1960s in Paris, where, homosexuality was frowned upon. And so these two men could not really live to their full potential in terms of their relationship outside of the world. And so the way in which they were able to exist within this relationship, it's within the four walls of Giovanni's room, which is why the book is called Giovanni's Room. It's a really short book. It's extremely poetic. I think this would be probably more classified as a modern classic than as a classic, just because of the time period in which it was written in. What I love about Baldwin's writing is that I think it's still very beautiful prose and very kind of atmospheric and very poetic, but it's not convoluted. The sentences are smooth, but they're also clear. It makes it for a very accessible and easy read. And the emotional and identity-driven themes in this book just make it extremely relevant for today and just absolutely timeless. I would say if you're looking for something that is more modern in terms of the themes that are portrayed in here, but also has that weight of a classic story, then this is definitely the one that you want to pick up. The next one that we have is an author that I myself am very intimidated by. I'm very intimidated to get into his longer works. I started my journey with him this spring by reading a very short novella by him. And after reading it, I realized it's actually a very accessible writer. And I think this book is the perfect introduction to him and introduction to classics in general. And this is John Steinbeck of Mice and Men. This is a story of George and Lenny. They are both kind of low-income workers. They go from location to location just trying to make ends meet. Essentially, their goal in life is to earn enough money to have a little land of their own where they can have a farm and just live a life without so many struggles and economical challenges. The book really stands out in the characterization of the two men and their relationship, in my opinion. So Lenny is disabled. He had an accident when he was a child and his mental capacities are reduced, and so George is the one who always takes care of him. George is tiny, is a little bit sharp, rough around the edges, whereas Lenny, although he has a disability, he's a very warm character. George, although he's a bit sharp, a little bit mean sometimes, or he seems a bit rude, he actually really cares about Lenny, and he's always protective of him, trying to take care of him, trying to take care to shield him from the judgment of other people and how other people might take advantage of him because of his disability and also because the fact that he's Black. The writing in here is extremely clear, to the point. He uses plain language to explore his big ideas, which is why I think his stories are absolutely approachable but also profound. The ending of this book absolutely wrecked me. It's an ending that is kind of foreshadowed in the book, both in terms of plot plot elements, but also in terms of the voice and the tone of the book. It's the type of ending that will require you to stop what you're doing and just think about the book that you read before you can move on with your life. It's an incredibly touching story about love and friendship and survival and economical hardship. Alright, I'm going to recommend a book that is absolutely loved by every single person that reads it. I have never heard a person saying they thought this book was bad or even mid. Like, it's just a 5 out of 5 stars for everybody that I personally know who's read this book. And I'm talking about The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. The book follows Dorian Gray, who is very handsome. He's a handsome young man. His wish is that he wants to remain young forever. One of his friends actually paints a portrait of Dorian, and this portrait is the one who will take on the decaying and the getting old of Dorian, whereas he could stay younger for longer. And so with this premise, we follow Dorian just going into Victorian London and getting absolutely swept into all of its social luxuries that he could afford now that he's so young and rich. But obviously all of this is done to the expense of something, and that something is his own soul. It's a really gothic kind of thrillery book, but it doesn't feel like stuffy. That's the best way I can describe it. I feel like a lot of thrillers or a lot of gothic books, to me, they just come across as either stuffy or way too plot driven to the point where there's not enough room for the identity of the character to shine through. And I think Oscar Wilde perfectly got rid of both of these issues, and they just are non-existent in this book. There's suspense, there's horror, but it's also not just plot driven. It's also a book that delves into philosophical questions about vanity. There's drama in here, there's excess, luxury, aestheticism, horror, like the whole thing. And it's just written in the most beautiful language. If on this list you are looking for the book that is the most juicy, the most dramatic, this is the book that you want to pick up. The next book that I'm going to recommend is going to be for my countryside loving girlies, and that is Anne of Green Gables by Ella Montgomery. This is the first installment in a series of 8 books, but it can very much be read as a standalone, so you don't have to go into this thinking that you'll have to commit 8 books to get to the story. It's a very beautiful story on its own, and then if you want to continue to see what happens in the life of Anne following this book, then you can do that, but you don't have to. The story follows Anne, who is a beautiful redhead little girl. I think at the beginning of this book she's 11 years old, and she's an orphan, and she gets picked by 2 siblings living in the countryside on the island of Prince Edward, Marilla and Matthew. Both of them, what they originally wanted was a boy to help around with the farm and all the chores that are to do around the house, because they're both getting a little bit old and they're unable to do as much as they wished around the house. When Anne gets there, they realize there's been a mistake and they got sent a girl instead of a boy. But Anne is really persistent in the fact that she wants to stay and she wants to help around the house. Anne has a huge personality. There's so much chaos, there's so much imagination, and what I really love about her character is her optimism. She's just always so grateful for everything that she has. No matter the situation she gets in, she always decides the positive route, and she delights in nature. That's one of the most beautiful portions of this book, is when we see nature through the eyes of Anne, who just kind of always romanticizes nature. I want to read to you just a little bit of that type of writing so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. So here's a section where her and Marilla were talking about the tree in the orchard. Oh, I don't mean just a tree. Of course it's lovely. Yes, it's radiantly lovely. It blooms as if it meant it. But I meant everything. The garden and the orchard and the brook and the woods, the whole big dear world. Don't you feel as if you just love the world on a morning like this? And you follow Anne through all of the different seasons, and you just get to see how she romanticizes every single season. A very famous quote from this book is, "I'm so glad we live in a world where there are Octobers." And honestly, can't agree more. There's absolutely no complicated plot here, no crazy symbolism going on or anything like that. It's literally just the coming of age story of Anne living in her new community, making friends, getting acquainted with everyone in the village, making enemies, doing some stupid little things that usually children do. The structure of this is also something that I think it's good for beginners, because every chapter is quite episodic in the sense that every chapter has a little story, and so it makes it very easy easy to get through, and overall just creates a very structured plot line. This is actually my favorite book from this entire list of books that I've compiled today, but that's probably just because I'm subjectively always just so interested and in love with anything that has to do with both the countryside and romanticizing descriptions of nature. The last book that I have to recommend is a French book, and that is Jules Verne, Around the World in 80 Days. My copy is in Italian because I randomly read it in Italian, but it's also translated in English, of course. We follow here Phileas Fogg, who's a very rich and respected Englishman, and he makes a bet with some of his Englishmen fancy friends that he can travel around the whole entire world in 80 days. Now, of course, this happens in the 19th century where we don't have airplanes, and so travel around the world demands much more time than it would in our days. It's such a fun adventure. I loved it so much. This is definitely a book that is more plot driven than some of the other books on this list. So if you're looking for something that is a bit more fast paced, this is definitely the book that I would recommend. And this is definitely also more on the adventure side rather than more emotional story. Phileas Fogg employs a valet, Passepartout, who is going with him on this crazy adventure, and you basically follow them go through country to country, from culture to culture, using different types of transportation, including trains, ships, at some point even elephants, I think, if I remember correctly. They make different types of encounters, they have delays on the way, which makes it a very kind of thrilling experience to see if they're able to get it in time, or how are they gonna find a solution to the fact that this train is not coming. There's also a little bit of a love story going on here. It's honestly such a good adventure story, and just because the plot is driven by this kind of challenge that he has to do, it's so fun to get through and just gives the book structure, but also it gives it momentum, which makes it so enjoyable to read and wants you to keep picking up this book all the time. So here we have the final list of all of the books that I would recommend for you if you are a beginner reader into classics. Obviously, I would recommend these books to anybody that wants to read classics, not just a beginner. I think these are amazing top tier books. Something that I wanted to mention that I didn't mention in the beginning is none of these books are books that I consider to be kind of easy books. I don't think in order for you to read a book, if you are new to classics, it's a requirement for you to read something that is easy. And you probably already noticed that a lot of these books actually have quite some complexity. There's profound themes in here that are explored. And I think that's something that you should try to actually delve into as a beginner. You don't want to read something that is flat and that doesn't have something to tell you, because then you'll probably just end up being bored. So all of these books, although they're easier to get through and more accessible, I think they're still books that have some meaning and have something to share with you, a story that you can connect to, or just some themes that you can think about, because at the end of the day, that's what literature is for. So I'm really hoping that you got something out of this video and you found some good recommendations to start your classic reading journey. Thank you so much for being here and for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one. Bye.